Hi everyone, and you're very welcome to this morning's webinar. So sorry about that there now. Just before we start off today, I'm going to do a quick sound test. So at the right of your screen, you'll have a control panel. And if you can just type a yes if you can hear me into the questions box, that would be great. Okay, so there is a few yeses going through there. That's great. Okay, so if today's webinar is Contracts of Employment Made Easy, and this will be presented by Laura Murphy and Michelle Arkins, who are employment law experts here at Bright Contracts. Today's webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording of the webinar will be sent to all attendees afterwards. We will also include a copy of the presentation slides for your future reference. If you have any questions, you can type them into the questions box on the control panel at the right of your screen. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. So I'll now pass you over to Laura to begin today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. I've set out an agenda here that you can see. Firstly, I'm going to discuss some of the key points with regard to employment contracts. Then I'll pass you over to my colleague Michelle, who will show you a very simple solution to help you manage your contracts of employment in your workplace. And then, as always, we'll gladly take any questions that you have at the end. I suppose in terms of your employee-employer relationship, the contract of employment really is the most important thing that you'll ever deal with. It really is the foundation stone of the employer-employee relationship. So I cannot reiterate enough how important it is for employers to get their contracts right and to get them in place. Not only will it clarify certain conditions for the employee, but for the employer it will also offer you extra protection, and it will really be your go-to guide in the event of a dispute. Just before we kind of go into it, when we started talking to our source customers a number of years ago now, I suppose, most of whom are small employers, probably similar to yourselves, I would imagine. So we soon learned from talking to those customers that there was a lot of confusion amongst Irish employers when it came to contracts of employment. And I've listed some of those queries, questions and misconceptions here for you to see. And some of them you may or may not be familiar with from your own thinking. And what I want to say on it is that whilst the importance of the contract cannot be stressed enough, they really shouldn't be something that employers fear or feel that aren't necessary for them. So our goal today is to simplify the employment contract for you and to make it accessible to small employers. And hopefully in the course of this webinar today, we'll answer some of those misconceptions and dispel some of those misconceptions. So moving on, and just firstly to touch on to the legal side of it, it actually is a legal requirement that all employees receive a written statement for their terms and conditions of employment. And this includes your full-time employees, which is obviously always kind of the standard one and the obvious one, but it's also your part-time employees. They should also be getting contracts of employment. So whether it is that you have a student coming in on a Saturday for a few hours or coming in 6 to 9 before the shop closes, they really do need to have a contract in place as well. Also, your short-term workers or your fixed-term workers, perhaps people who are coming in for holiday cover to cover seasonal business, seasonal trends, whether it's a busy Christmas period, busy summer period, Easter holidays, whatever it is, those short-term, fixed-term workers, they're going to need a contract as well. And lastly, your casual workers, the people who you call in as and when you need them to cover busy periods, and they're probably, I don't want to say the most important one, but there can be so much confusion around that area, so it's important also to have contracts for those as well. So legislation states that the written statement must be given to the employee within 2 months of their start date. Now, I would always recommend that employers, that they give their contracts to their employee either before they actually start employment or on their first day. That really is best practice. And this helps to set the tone of the relationship. And it also, if there are any queries, it's good to get them cleared up and dealt with before the employee starts. And actually here where I say this 2 months, that's actually under review with the now government, and this might be changing, so it's just kind of one to watch as well. Also legislation states that the employee must be issued with a disciplinary procedure within 28 days of starting employment, and the disciplinary procedure will contain details of a dismissal procedure. So legislation does specify that this must be provided to the employee. And generally the disciplinary procedure would be given with the contract of employment, maybe perhaps as part of your staff handbook. So I would think that's another argument as to why you should really give your contracts out sooner than that 2-month suggested deadline by legislation. And finally, the final point on this, and we're talking about the legal requirement, your existing employees do also have a right to a contract of employment. So if you don't have a contract in place for existing staff, I would say to you that it's never too late to introduce your contracts. You really want to do it now before an issue arises. How you manage an employee issue will be so much easier and so much straightforward if you have documentation in place to support you and to be able to refer back to. And we see this time and time again on our helpline where employers put contracts on the long finger thinking that they'll never have an issue, and the next thing something happens and then they struggle to manage it because they don't have any contract or paperwork or policies in place. So really the advice is it doesn't matter how long an employee has been with you, really it's never too late to get that contract in place. And also your existing employees can come to you and request to have a contract and request you to give them a contract. And if you do receive such a request, you have a 2-month period again in which to respond to them. So just moving on then to actually the cost of non-compliance, because as we said, it's a legal obligation to give out these written terms. If as an employer you are found not to have written statements in place, you will be fined 4 weeks gross pay per employee. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but if I do some very basic calculations with that, if you have 10 employees earning an average of 500 per week, you could be facing fines of €20,000. And I really don't think that's a figure that many small employers would easily swallow, definitely not some of our customers that we're talking to. And there is this mindset among some employers that this will never happen to them, but the reality is that it can, and it does, and it has happened to small employers. And spot checks can be carried out on businesses. Now previously these were carried out by NERA, which you may or may not be familiar with. NERA now fall under the Workplace Relations Commission, the WRC, and inspections are carried out by the WRC, who actually now have increased powers than NERA did. And one of those increased powers is the ability to issue on-the-spot fines as well, which is an added reason why you need to get your house in order on some of these issues. So just for example, for yourselves, in 2014, NERA carried out almost 6,000 workplace inspections, both planned and unplanned. And the majority of them, actually, I was just looking at doing some reading there recently, majority of those inspections were done in retail, hospitality, food and drink area and hotels. So really that's I suppose, looking at the attendees today, that will cover a lot of you. So it's just to be in mind that the WRC they do and they have the ability to call in unannounced and just check if your documentation is in order. So just to move on then, avoiding costly disputes. Failure to have proper contracts in place not only leaves you open to these costly fines that we've just been talking about, but it also leaves you open to costly disputes, which can then escalate to tribunals, and then you're looking at legal fees, etc. So not having clearly documented terms of employment can really leave you open as an employer. And I just want to give you an example of this. An agreement between an employer and employee is usually made up of 2 types of terms: express terms, i.e. those that are written down in writing, and implied terms, which are unwritten and tend to have developed over time. Your implied terms can be formed as a result of custom and practice, and custom and practice is a practice that has developed over a period of time or by arrangement that really has never been specifically agreed upon between the employer and the employee, but it can be argued to have formed part of your terms of conditions of employment. But the issue with the custom and practice terms is that there can easily be disagreement because they've never been specifically agreed upon. An example of this would be a recent case involving a publishing company. And I've just kind of said, I've set out some of the details of that there. They're a publishing company, and in the downturn, they decided up until that point they had always issued bonuses to staff. And with the downturn, they weren't in that position to pay bonuses on that particular year, so they decided against paying bonuses. The employees actually took a case against the company claiming that bonuses had become custom and practice and that they were entitled to their bonuses. At the tribunal, the judge actually did find in favour of the employees, and yes, the bonus payment had had formed part of their terms of conditions and should be paid. So that's like a really obvious thing. Like you had a small clause in your contract stating something very simple to say that bonuses might be paid but are totally at discretion of management. That simple clause would have protected that company in that situation and prevented that case happening. There's also a recent case that we came across just talking to one of our customers, and they were telling us a little bit about why they were now using bright contracts, and it was a local hairdressers, and they had let somebody go, but again, they kind of been happily going along for a number of years, and again, this kind of idea when nothing's ever going to happen to me, I'll be fine. Lo and behold, they did have to make a dismissal, and lo and behold, that employee or former employee did bring a case against them. So they very diligently went and sought legal advice and paid for their legal fees, etc. They turned up at the tribunal, which incidentally was held in a local hotel. So you're not dragged down to the forecourts or anything like that. It's in a local hotel. The judge at that tribunal didn't even wait to hear the employer's defence. They said, where is your contracts? Where are your documentation? They didn't have any to show, and he just ruled out the case immediately and slapped a 20,000 fine on the employer. So again, that 20,000 fine, that's a real case, and again, it's not something that I would imagine many small employers could swallow. But just moving on, we spoke a little bit earlier about your different types of employees and how different employees will need different types of will need a contract, and obviously there are different types of contracts that you will issue to the employee depending on their working arrangement. So I'll just touch on these very briefly. So you got your permanent or your indefinite contract. Sorry, excuse me. A permanent contract is a contract between an employer and an employee where no end date is specified. So you expect this person to be working with you for the foreseeable future. Permanent contracts don't have to be full-time. It can very much be a part-time member of staff as well. Your fixed term contracts is obviously a person who is employed for a limited but definite period of time with a predetermined end date. Specific purpose contract, that could be somebody who have in for a particular project. So you don't really know when the end date is, but you know that whenever this project is over, they will finish working with you. Again, temporary contract is similar to the above two that we've just talked about. And then casual contract and 0 hours contracts. So this is the as and when person, the person that you call in maybe to cover extra hours. So there's no continuing relationship, particularly with the casual contract, and the individual may be contacted when required. These are kind of two interesting contracts types at the moment, the casual and the zero, because the minister Jed Nash, he had, back late last year, I suppose, he ordered a kind of some research into the use of these 0 hours contracts with the intention that there was going to be some changes brought in. So that went to consultation, and actually, so we're waiting changes. So the legality behind these casual contracts is kind of under review at the moment. I think it's interesting for a lot of small employers, because a lot of small employers that we talk to, they very much depend on these to give them that flexibility when somebody rings in sick, or again for busy periods, if there's a particular promotion going on in a bar or whatever it is. These casual contracts and 0 hour contracts can really help employers in that regard. So I think it's interesting, but obviously now with our upcoming election, that's all kind of up in the air, but it's very much a wait and see moment for this area at the moment. So again, just moving on into what should be contained in your contract of employment. I won't go into this in too much detail, because I know Michelle is going to kind of go through the contract with you in a minute, and she'll kind of show you in more detail. But legislation does state there is some specific information that needs to be in your contract. It's not a matter of just kind of putting a few bits in writing. There is some certain information that needs to be included in that. And I've set them out there: your name and address of your employer, your employee, place of work, job description, duration if it's a fixed term, paid leave, sick leave, those kind of details. They must be in your contract. But just moving on, what I really want to talk to you about is the best practice clauses, and these are the additional clauses, and these are really what make your contract sound and sturdy and robust. So in addition to these statutory minimum requirements, these best practice clauses really are recommended, kind of for two reasons, because A, they provide greater clarity on the relationship between the employee and the employer, because some of these clauses will be specific to your company and what's happening in your organisation. And B, they'll protect you, the employer, if something arises, and it'll be a fallback, a point of reference for you as well. So just to give you a sample, I suppose, of what these best practice could be would be the probation clause, pay in lieu of notice clause if you wanted to, if somebody had handed in their notice and you want to terminate them kind of immediately rather than working their notice. Post-termination restrictions, this kind of clause can restrict an employee from working with competitors or signing up customers after they leave. Confidentiality arrangements or bonus one there, I have noticed that as well, and we've just kind of seen the case on that as well. So you can really pick and choose after the statutory minimum of what clauses can suit your organisation, and you can really kind of add in extra ones that would really protect you and clarify the relationship. And I would really, really recommend that you do consider some of them. So I mentioned then briefly earlier about the disciplinary procedure, and it could be part of the company handbook, and I just touched briefly on this company handbook, but I just wanted to expand on that a little bit, as really the company handbook and the employee handbook, or company handbook, staff handbook, employee handbook, they can be kind of interchanged, the names, I suppose, but they go hand in hand with the contract of employment. The handbook really should be issued in conjunction with the contract of employment, and it sets the tone of your organisation. It's you can set out your objectives, your company's ethos, but it also outlines the standards of conduct that you expect as an employer and the standards that you expect from employees in the company. It'll set out details regarding safety, your company regulations, and any kind of administrative procedures in the company, whether that be how you apply for holiday leave. It can inform your employees of terms and conditions of employment as well, and it's a useful reference guide for both your employers and your employees. And I find that all the time it's always kind of a go-to guide, especially for managers who are posed with a question. It's a good place to be able to refer back to. But the one thing I would point out as well with the company handbook is it really needs to be regularly reviewed and updated. It's a working document. It's not something that's kind of put in a drawer or left. It really should be a well-thumbed document, and it should be easily accessible to all. That's probably one question that we get a lot from people is, do I need to print off a company handbook and give it to all staff members? Because a company handbook can be quite lengthy and there can be a lot of pages in it. I know our standard one is, I think it's 37 pages. So we would say no, you can certainly leave it online or leave it in a drive somewhere if you have a local drive that everybody uses, or you can print off a few copies of your handbook and leave it somewhere that everybody can access. I suppose for a lot of kind of smaller operations, if there's a canteen or some sort of a facility where people are having their teas or their coffees at their lunch break, and then it's an ideal place then to leave the company handbook there so people can access it there should they need it. So I've touched very briefly on the company handbook there, but I'm going to pass you over now to my colleague Michelle, who's going to kind of talk you through Bright Contracts and how Bright Contracts can kind of offer that solution to you in terms of creating and managing your contracts of employment and your staff handbook.
That's great. Thanks very much, Laura. Now I'll just bring you into our software. Initially what we're going to show you today is our software program, Bright Contracts. And what Bright Contracts literally is made up of kind of four main tabs that you'll see up the very top of your screen. The first tab is your summary screen, which will give us a great overview at any stage of what's going on in the company. As you can see here, we have 16 employees in total. We have three of our employees here without a handbook. There's a couple of more that have that we know we need to get around to giving them a contract, or perhaps we've given the contract already and we need to ensure that it was signed and sent back into us and put on file. And then we have a couple of employees here that have an out-of-date handbook. Now, what I mean when we're actually looking at the software for the purpose of this is not to panic. If they have an out-of-date handbook, that could literally just mean that slight amendments was perhaps made to a policy. So, for example, just like a recently updated section that we did yesterday was on the email, internet and telecommunications use. And again, it was just a slight edit that we did, which again, to the normal run-of-the-mill or to the employees, it won't impact on them at all. But the fact that we can just send that out, and if you click on it, like we would have amended this section here, and all you would literally do is go up, you can go to print a section and then export it as a PDF to your employees. So it's just a handy little overview that way of how to kind of work around it. So all of this is contained within the summary screen, so it just gives you a bit of a donut chart as well of what's happening. Our second screen is our employer screen. Here we can at any stage go in and put in our company logo. So if you have that on your desktop, you just pop it in here. We have our registered employer name, and then obviously our trade name, and then the address. And obviously the address is very important in a contract of employment, especially in a situation where the main address of the employer, they could have different, let's say, shops or something around the country, but just that you need the main registered address. So we have that there. And then we move off into our handbook. And I'll just quickly go through the handbook for the minute, just to give you a bit of a brief overview. I won't spend too long because it's quite lengthy. It's about nearly 40 pages. But literally just to let you know that this sits inside the software. So if you do nothing to amend or change or edit anything in it, we have made sure that all of our policies comply with the Labour Court recommendations, and it just follows all the different codes of practices. And in fact, if anything, it's brilliant as a great reference guide for managers or for employers in-house. So if you're anyway unsure of the different employment acts and what the onus is and or the obligation on the employer, just have a quick look at any of your policies. So for argument's sake, what Laura spoke about earlier on, one of your main policies we know was a disciplinary and grievance procedure, which she stated had to be given within 28 days of your employee starting. This would cover the main disciplinary. So we have a look at the purpose, scope, the types of policies, what we could construe as misconduct or gross misconduct, the types of procedures, like the informal counselling side of it. So we'll deal with it in-house, and hopefully it won't escalate any further and we can kind of put it to bed. If not, we go down the formal route and we'll talk you through literally the investigation process, and if that has to run in tandem with the disciplinary, we'll advise you all on that, and the types of disciplinary process and the stages as well that you're meant to follow. So as I say, it sits all within the software, and then we move down into our grievance. This would be where an employee in the workplace may have a grievance with a practice, or it could be with another employee or even indeed a customer, and that there is a policy in place and a process that they follow to raise that grievance with the employer, to give the employer an opportunity to address it. And that's extremely important, because in a lot of cases with employees where they've gone to court claiming constructive dismissal, where they felt that there was something going on in the workplace, that it wasn't dealt with correctly, and they had no, there's nothing else they could have done but leave employment. The first question that's normally asked, and will be asked by an adjudicator, was, well, was there an in-house grievance procedure? Was there somebody you could have spoken to and given an opportunity to see could they address and fix it and sort it out for you? Like if they come along and it's literally, well, no, we do have a procedure, but I didn't follow it. I left. That really weakens, if not throws out their case. So it's just a very good procedure to have in as well. It moves off into bullying harassment. So again, I won't go into too in-depth into it, but it goes through all the different sections of it as well, and the bullying, lack of respect, the types of procedures again, the informal, formal investigation and the outcome. We move off into health and safety policies. I'll just always remind people it's not a health and safety statement. Obviously, that's a separate document you need to ensure that applies to your own business, but it just again gives you an opportunity to put in key details for fire or accident reporting, first aid or personal protective equipment. We go down into our quality policy and we go into all the different areas and obviously make sure that nobody is discriminated on the 9 grounds, and again gives you a little bit of an overview of what to be mindful and to what to look out for as a manager or an employer in the workplace. We have a full whistleblowing policy, performance management, induction training policy and information and consultation. Now, even though we touch on all of these different areas within the handbook, we do have additional documentation that we keep in the software as well, so you can refer and use kind of different template letters, like we have a full induction training checklist, certain things like that that you can use in tandem to what already exists here. And then we move off into another section which is terms and conditions, and here it's a great little area to be able to keep your contract nice and tidy and small, because obviously that's the contractual agreement that you have with your employee, and then you elaborate further in your handbook. And the nice thing about this is obviously in the handbook section and every section that you do have, you're able to go in and edit. So if there's anything that maybe doesn't apply in your circumstance, there's no problem. Like for argument, if you go, let's say alcohol and drugs, maybe that could apply to a lot. Maybe monitoring of the internet and email use. If there's, nobody uses computers or anything like that, you can just go up and delete the section and just press yes, and it's saved then again up the top here in your optional sections. So you can just go along your entire handbook, take out what you want, and you can also add in a new section. So if you've got a practice or a policy in place at the moment that you don't see in our handbook, you can just go ahead, put it in under any of the main headings you see here, and just insert your new policy. You can also send it in to us in Bright Contracts. We'll have a look at it, make sure that everything is right, and we can send it back to you and then just pop it into the handbook. And then we go through all the different leaves and benefits. Again, great referral guide for employers or managers, that you can just make sure that you're looking after your employees and you're giving them what they're legally entitled to give. And a lot of the cases, it's just where an employee can come up and ask the question and you might not have the answer. It's just a simple thing of like, leave that with me, I'll come back to you on it. Go in, have a look, have a bit of a reference as to what's in the handbook here, and you can always be assured that any of the information that is contained within the company handbook from Bright Contracts is fully up to date. So that's a nice little thing as well. And then we have the little section for our pension policy and plans. As we all may know, that if we don't have a company pension scheme, and again, you're not obliged to have one, but if you don't, you must have a PRSA scheme, which is the Personal Retirement Savings Account. And you must have the documentation in the workplace that's easily accessible to your employees, and that if they wish to join, that's no problem. You make the deductions from their payroll. And that's simply, if you don't have one, you have the other. So we have a little section there. So again, I know I kind of briefly went over just what's contained, but there's quite a bit inside it. And at all stages, as we said, because it's customizable, you can add sections, you can reorder, print just one section, you can delete sections, then you can mess around with cover page styles and fonts, headers and footers. And then we have your signature page. And this would be where you would hand out your handbook, and the great thing about software is we can just export it here as a PDF. We don't have to be printing 40 or 50 handbooks. And then when you're kind of happy and confident that you've given them enough time to read the handbook, you can either bring them all back in, and you can just use one single signature page for multiple employees, and they're literally just telling you that they acknowledge that they've read and received and understand the contents of your company handbook, and they sign off, and you just keep that on file in-house. Or you can do it separately, depending if you want to maybe carry something like this out in blocks of employees. And then we move off into the main area here that Laura was chatting to you about earlier on, and this is our contract of employment. So really what Laura had spoken to you about is that even though the law doesn't stipulate you give a contract per se, because as we all know, the contract exists the minute the job offer goes out and the acceptance comes in. So that's fine. I was offered a job, I've joined, I'm happy to be paid X amount and to do such and such role. There is this contract in law. But what you have to give and what you're obliged to give, as Laura stated, is the written statement. And the written statement is normally made up of around 16 main key areas that you must give in writing to your employee. And the other side of it as well, that Laura touched on as well, that even though you can give the 16 key areas, it's very important to bring in additional policies and clauses into the contract to ensure that you have further protection as an employer. So we'll just take a quick look at how easy one can be done up. So we'll have a look at, we've Michael Connolly here. He's no contract at the moment. So all I'm doing is clicking on Michael here on the left of the screen, going up and pressing new contract. And what I can do is, rather than start from scratch with Michael, I know for a fact that I'm hiring Michael, and Michael is actually going to have the exact same job role as Justin Foley, who joined me last September. So I'm going to click on, and I'm going to use this now as a default contract, and I can go in and still change all my areas. So in order to do up the contract, we can see it's just made up of a couple of tabs here with different headings at the very top of the screen. And all I have to do is literally go through one step by step and input any information into the relevant areas. And what we've also done to kind of make things 10 times easier for you is at any stage throughout the process where you're looking to enter in information, there's little snippets of information that give you the reason why A, this is in the contract, and B, kind of what's important about it. So you can use that as a bit of a reference guide throughout. So we can see here from our first tab from the employee, we've Michael Connolly, we've Michael's address, and we know that Michael's male. We can put in his date of birth. Again, this is only really necessary if you've employees that are under the age of 18. Michael's job also is going to be a sales assistant, so I don't need to change that. And his job description, what we've done in our company is that we have them as separate documents that they can read either with the contract or at a later stage. And really the job description just breaks up the main duties, roles and responsibilities that they have within the company, which is kind of, it's a good thing to have if you've got people in positions that they're quite varied and quite wide. So it just means you can narrow it down, and that there's a great degree of flexibility in it as well, but that your employee knows at all times what exactly their role is in the company. We know that we need to enter in the rate of pay. So what I'm going to do here is, Michael is actually going to be on €11 per hour. So I don't really need to change anything on that. I'm going to be paying actually Michael fortnightly, and it'll be by credit transfer. So that's perfect, and all I do is press save. Move off into dates and places. The date of the contract will be today, the 18th. The commencement of employment was the 18th of July. So I just want to get rid of that because that would have been my default contract. So he's going to be starting with me also today. Commencement of period of continuous employment would be if Michael had worked in a different company and would be transferring over, or if there was a transfer of undertakings, that's where we put in the date into there, to that section. Again, gives you a little information on it if you're a little bit unsure as to why we've asked for it. The probationary period length, again, Michael's only starting with us, so we're going to put him on a 6-month probationary period, and we're going to make sure that that's included. And it's very important with your probationary period to have a clause to ensure that the Unfair Dismissals Act won't apply. So that's just given us an opportunity to make sure that Michael's going to work out in our company, and that equally, you know, Michael's sure and is happy with the job and the expectations that he has, and that we're happy with his performance. And then we'll review and assess that throughout the 6 months. And if necessary, we can extend the probationary period for a further 3 months. And if we do that, we'll make sure that we'll give a contract to stipulate that we've extended it, and that will further review him. So just to make sure that you have that. The place of work, we just have the ward in County Dublin. There's no problem at all. And that's obviously where our office is based. However, we do have other offices, and that Michael will be required to work elsewhere. So for that reason that we've ticked the box here, that if we expect him to work elsewhere, and that can be, I know there's a couple of questions that come in even earlier on, what happens when you have your employees working in different areas, or that, you know, depending on maybe the construction industry, you know, it depends where you go. You have different jobs, different weeks, different months. That's no problem. We have a clause in there that'll literally state that they'd be required to work in different areas. We also, if there's anyone in the company for this, at this stage, Michael doesn't and won't be required to work outside the state for more than 1 month. But if he did, we'd have to ensure and that we have certain areas covered as well within the contract. And again, if you tick that box, that'll just default straight in for you. So it's just a nice little handy guide. Now, save the changes and move on again. The contract type and hours, Laura spoke about this earlier on. There seems to be always a lot of confusion. We get a lot of calls all the time between indefinite duration and where did that kind of kick in, and what's the difference between that and a fixed term. Don't get too bogged down with the types of the contract or kind of look into it kind of too much. The majority of people are normally on a permanent contract. So that is, we do hope that you're going to stay with us for a long time, unless there's a breaching contract or you leave and decide to terminate, or we terminate maybe due to misconduct or for disciplinary reasons. So other than that, it should be made permanent. You can give out a fixed term contract, but there needs to be objective justifiable grounds for it being a fixed term. And we know that there's, again, stipulations and that we need to look after and make sure that we follow and adhere to when we give out fixed terms, because it can't go over 4 years. And again, we've all that information in the software, so you can have a good look at it. Or we could have specific purpose contracts where we're bringing somebody in-house literally for one particular role. And when that role and job is completed, it could be somebody in marketing where you might want to say, look, I want you to ensure that I have 100 new customers within the next, 3 to 6 months. And once you reach that target for me, that's it. The contract will be finished at that stage. Or there could be a job, and you know that the duration of the job itself for a building contract will last 6 months, that you'll be hiring people literally for that 6 months contract. So their specific purpose. Or indeed, we might bring somebody in that will be covering somebody that's on long-term sick leave or on maternity leave. And again, we'll do the same. We'll have an actual date when the contract will expire, and we'll deal with it then at that stage. And it's very important as well with fixed term contracts that you talk to the person and the employee within the month of it expiring. And the handy little thing with Bright Contracts is it flags that employee or any employees that are on fixed term contracts. So it just gives you the heads up on it. Now, so that's perfect. We're going to put him on a permanent contract. Hopefully he'll stay with us. And he's going to be working, in this case, normal hours, because our normal hours are 9 to 5:30. So I don't need to change anything. But if I did want to and I wanted to work, I can go off into shift work and I can outline then the main details of the shift work and what he's required to do, or if it's casual hours. And what we also have for your casual hours, again within the software, is the full kind of writing that we can just literally copy and paste into that box for you also. You just click on that button. If you just go in there, you'll be able to find all your information. And then we also have an area for any collective agreements that you might have in the company. And again, just tells you literally all about it and what you need to do. So that's perfect. We've nothing there, so we can save off. I'm sorry, casual hours. I'm leaving him on normal hours. There he is. He's working 9 to 5. He's Monday. Actually, Michael is going to be Tuesday to Saturday. And I can enter into the text box here any exceptions to the normal hours. So if I want, he may be required to work Sundays. He might be required to work maybe 2 late evenings in a month or anything like that. We can just enter it in the text box there. We'll save off. And then we go into overtime, holidays, and other pay. And here we have overtime. We actually pay for our overtime. And any and all hours worked will be paid at time plus 1/3. Now again, it's up to yourself what you want to do, whether you want to give them time in lieu or whether you just pay them regular time. It's entirely up to yourself what you want to enter into the overtime. I know there's certain companies that don't pay overtime or you have to do so many hours, so it's entirely up to whatever rules and policies you have in-house. We move down then into annual leave. So because it's a permanent contract and he's on full-time hours, I know there's going to be 20 days annual leave because he'll work over the 1,365 hours. But in the case of, let's say we've somebody who's part-time, you just default the annual leave days back to 0. And then that'll default into your contract and will just state clearly that he's entitled to obviously 8% of all hours worked in a leave year. So that's no problem. I'll leave Michael on his 20. Come out of there. And then we have pay in lieu. So if an employee must be paid, and this again is very important for an employer. So if somebody's planning on leaving or if we were terminating the contract, that rather they work out their notice, we can just pay them in lieu of notice. And it's important to have that clause in the contract. So we have it there and I'm going to tick that box. So that's perfect. And sick pay. In this situation, actually, we don't have a sick pay scheme. So if Michael's out, there's nothing that the company is going to be doing. So I'll make sure I uncheck that box and save. And then move into our miscellaneous. Our rest breaks are unpaid. Michael will have a full hour. He'll have 60 minutes. And again, you can change all of this as well in the times or whether you want to pay or not pay. And the compensatory break details, if you want to enter that in, if it's a type of occupation that look at, there can be some times, some days that it's not feasible for the poor employee obviously to take the break. And we need to ensure that they have adequate rest periods, I mean under the health and safety grounds as well. So if he doesn't, we can compensate him at a later date. Then we look at the notice that's required for termination of the employment by the employee. So this instance, we'd like Michael to give us 1 week's notice. And then we have the area here for statutory notice. So it gives us, again, a bit of an outline, depending on the length of service that your employees have at the company, what it is that you're entitled to give them if you're going to end the contract. Here we have the least number of sick days for which we would require a doctor's certificate from Michael. We'll leave it at 2 days. And then the required notice we'd like from Michael if he can't work on a particular day. So, I mean, again, I know when we speak to some customers, they kind of want 24 hours or 12 hours, but you have to be sort of reasonable. If somebody's going to be ill in the morning, you know, there's no way to give you that sort of notice. So I think the norm is probably 2 to 3 hours you're hoping for. And then we will have a little area here for notice of absence requirements. So again, we can just even copy this little section here where we would like, if Michael's going to be out, we would like Michael to be able to contact our immediate manager by phone. You're required to contact your manager directly by phone. And that we could even enter in there that we will not and do not accept Facebook messages, text messages or LinkedIn messages, which seems to be happening from time to time in different companies. We have a retirement age here. We'll leave it at 66. It's better to have a retirement age than not. And then even if somebody reaches the age of 66, this contract will cease. But that doesn't mean you can't go ahead and give them another year or 2 years fixed term contract if you're happy to do so. And what I spoke on again in our handbook earlier on, our pension scheme or our PRSA provider. So we don't have a company pension scheme at the minute, but we do have a PRSA provider and we just use our own normal, our local bank, which is the AIB bank. So all you can literally do is walk in the door, pick up the brochures, bring them back, notify your employees that yes, our PRSA is AIB, we have all the booklets here. If you want to check up on it or you want to speak to maybe somebody in AIB, there's no problem, someone will come down. And if you wish to join, that's great, we'll look after you and make the deductions to your wages. Now we'll press save. And then you just move in at the very end what we have And the reason we do this is because we know not every position and not every person in the company is going to have the same contract of employment. As I'd say, a contract of employment we might give to a senior manager or even a company director will have a lot more different clauses in it than somebody that's perhaps working just part-time, doing 10, 12 hours at a weekend. For that reason, we give the option for you to build in additional clauses that might be applicable to certain employees and not the others. So for example here, what I've done is I've built in acceptance of gifts, confidential information, expenses, deductions from wages, very, very important to have in, double employment, again, that obviously we need to ensure as employers that he's not working over a maximum working week of 48 hours. So if he's doing 40 hours at me, I can't have him working in some shop up the road another 20 or 30 hours. And if I'm aware of that, I need to do something about it. Again, they're just all different acts you need to be mindful of. A meal allowance, we're going to be looking after that. A right to search clause. And if there's anything else I want to go into, all I simply have to do is go into our section here. You see? Yeah. And then come back out of that in on our additional content section. So what I can do is just, I will need my license key. Now, because we've made sure that we have all your information. There we are. So all I literally have to look at is any of the different additional sections here. There may be mediation or layoff and short time, which is a very good one to have. So again, anyone you click on, you can just copy and paste and then go back into the software. Lovely. Sorry there. Yeah. Going off on that normally doesn't take that long. Sorry, that was my fault for closing out. Apologies on that one. So sorry, so if I go back in then to my contract, I'm able to just have a look at Michael. And I'm able to add in a new one into this. So it's really, really easy from that point of view. And then just kind of copy and pasting them out then. Perfect. And I can just write in whatever I want and I just save them in. And literally what it does is at any instance you can just go back up and preview. And you can do this throughout the entire time of your contract and you can have a good look at it. And when you see when you preview in, there's a lot of information here in the contract that you wouldn't have kind of been reading as you go through the different stages in creating the contract. And that's because from a software point of view, we've locked and kept that away, I suppose, from anybody within the company to go in and edit anything that would, you know, render you sort of non-compliant or that you'd be putting any type of clause into it that really wouldn't wash or stand up in court or in front of an arbitrator. So it just further protects you from that point of view. And what we also do in the introductory statement side of it, we make sure that we reference the company handbook and that the policies and procedures that are contained within the company handbook are also part and parcel of the terms and conditions of your employment. So it's just a very useful thing to have because one will talk about the other. And it just goes through all the main headings that we literally looked at in the contract, the start dates, probationary periods, positions, place of work, type of contract, employment out of state, hours of work, so on and so forth. So all the key areas that you're obliged to have in the written statement and also more to ensure that there's protection there for you as an employer. And the great thing is that if there's not a clause at the moment inside by contracts, like we have a lot in ourselves, so if there's something that you wish to add and you wanted advice on it, for argument's sake, if you wanted to go down the road of restrictive covenants or, you know, really lengthy confidentiality agreements, you would get our advice beforehand just to make sure that it is something that would stand up for you and not render the contract void or illegal in some cases. Okay, so that's literally how quick it is. And that brings us back to just an area even as well that you can just go in, you can change and look after and store everything and you're able to lock down your contract. That's very important because some of the grievances that we've had with certain employers is that changes and amendments have been made to contracts of employment by their own staff members that would have been in quite senior positions. And so we just kind of added the further protection by ensuring that we locked it down. So for argument's sake, if I wanted to go in and have a look at Michael, and then I spoke with Michael, Michael was very happy with his contract of employment and he signed it and I signed it because obviously the obligation is on the employer. I just click the button there as Mark has signed, and then that will mean that Michael's, yeah, you see, he's turned light grey now, which means I can't go in and edit anything in Michael's contract. Okay, so I hope that will give you a very good overview of how fast and how quick an employment contract. I know I was a little bit longer doing it, but it was just to kind of run through all the different areas. So we're kind of hitting that time now. I suppose we better go back over to you, Laura, to do maybe a couple of questions. I know there's a lot that's coming in at the moment.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Michelle. So we'll just have to take a few questions as they're coming in, but just just before we do, just to kind of finally sum up, I suppose, really it's so important to get your contracts in place, and because, as I said earlier, they are the backbone of the relationship, and your handbooks really do go alongside your contracts as well. So it's really best to get the two of them all done and all sorted together. And I hope from Michelle's demonstration that you can kind of see and agree that by contracts really is an easy solution to help deliver that to you as well, and that the support there in terms of kind of, obviously you can go off and do it your own and the controller's with you, but we have the support there just to kind of at the other end of the phone should you need it. So just seeing what kind of questions are coming in now. Michelle mentioned, I see one, contracts for apprentices. The software doesn't actually have contracts for apprentices, but I would absolutely agree that yes, you should. It's a different kind of agreement. You should have a written agreement in place with an apprentice, and if it's something that you're considering using an apprentice, certainly come to us and I can kind of point you in the right direction in terms of the template. I suppose it's a much shorter agreement, but there are agreements that you should put in place, and we can certainly point you in the right direction if you are hiring apprentices and you need to have something in place.
And then there's another question that if the employee has been with you years, do you date the contract as today or when they started? No, it's very important that you date the contract from the date that they started in the company. And this would be for reasons for like redundancy purposes. So if anything was to happen on the line, you were to make them redundant. Obviously their redundancy, the years take effect from the date. So, and again, never ever to worry too much about something like that we would get a lot of times of, I'll sneakily put in a different date so it doesn't look like that I haven't met my obligation, what I should have done years ago. Don't worry, just make sure that whatever on the content is correct. And as Laura said very earlier on in the webinar, that there's no problem. If somebody's with you years, there's absolutely no problem on giving them, because all you're doing as an employer is making sure that you're looking after your obligations and just fulfilling that. So there's no problem. You can put it back, date it back to 1980. It doesn't make any odds. Yeah, there's no problem.
Just another one there, place of work section, can it vary? Absolutely. The default contract that Michelle's actually taken you through, and we default that if you're creating one, the place of work will default as the employer's address. Just to, in 9 times out of 10, that's the case, and it's the majority of cases. But that's in a free text box within the contract, so within the software, sorry. So you're able to change that, no problem. And absolutely, it's the case in lots of different work environments that there is no one fixed place of work, and it'll very much depend on the project or whatever it is. So absolutely, it's perfectly fine to say that the place of work varies or differs, and the right contracts definitely allows for that as well.
Yeah, very good. Just trying to read a few more of these. If you want to change a term or a condition that's in the contract, can I just go ahead and do this and tell the employee at a later stage? No. It's for the simple fact, I suppose, that like what you have is a contractual agreement that two parties entered into from day one. So you can't unilaterally just change any of the terms and agreements without discussing this with the employee. So the best thing to do is just invite the employee in, have a chat with them, tell them the reasons, because again, as an employer, if you're reasonable and you've reasonable grounds and justifiable grounds for doing what you're doing, then, an employee will normally, 9 times out of 10, will work with you. But if you're trying to just go in there and change something, definitely if it's anything as significant as reducing their wages or reducing, as Laura said earlier on, bonuses or anything that would have an immediate effect on them, then no, absolutely, you do need to sit down with them. When it comes to like the changes of rostering and hours of work and stuff like that, again, it's something you must sit down and speak to your employee about, and just make sure that you have their consent and rejig your contract. So for argument's sake, for we had even earlier on in the software, you can just go back into that individual's contract and redo that specific section and just hand it back out again. And at least you're happy that the documentation you have in place is fully up to speed, like with currently with your employees. Like, so that's very important.
Yeah, and you kind of just maybe just a similar note, but not totally related. If you are kind of making changes to your handbook, and I know Michelle kind of referred there at the start of her speech where she had made change to her email policy. If you make changes to your handbook, do you need to reissue a whole new handbook to everybody? Particularly if you're not in an email work environment where people aren't using email and online every day. And no, you don't have to print off a whole new 40-page document. It's perfectly acceptable to just print off the new clause or the change clause, highlight to people maybe in a staff memo that this is a new policy in place, you've recently put in a social media policy or whatever the case may be, and then you're just printing off that one policy, and you can add it into your documentation, or you can put it up on a notice board, or you can send it out to employees, but you don't have to, again, print off the whole 40-page document.
We've another question. Can you have a contract of employment without a staff handbook, or do you need both? That's a good question. I mean, I can have the contract or the written statement, and it depends. Like, we have looked at certain contracts from Bright Contracts users that we would have now at the moment, they would have sent in, and like some of them are 18 or 20 pages long. And all I'd say to you is just be very careful, because this is a contract that you have and you're bound by the terms and the conditions inside. So you want to make sure you're not including too much in there that's going to restrict you from being able to make amendments. And that's why we'd always say it's best to keep your contract short and sweet, but make sure you've all the relevant information and clauses that you need for the company, and then elaborate and build in a lot more in the handbook. And as I say, because one talks about the other, it's very, very good, even bring them to court or anything like that. Like, we've seen one particular customer that I dealt with last week, he was delighted that there was something he didn't even realise even at the time was in his own handbook that actually saved him in a case, and he was able to use that as well. But you also have to look at the different types of policies and procedures that you have in the company are quite lengthy, so you do want to keep them in one document. You don't want to have 15 or 20 different documents and to be going around to your employees asking them to sign different pages, and then you've a huge big employee file. So it's just best to have both. Yeah.
Just seen another question coming in. I think we've time for a couple more. Where is it gone now? Can you include a section saying the employee may travel outside the state for a number of months? Can you? Probably the question is, do you have to? Because yes, you do have to include that section if it is the case that somebody's going to be travelling and working outside the state. If they're working outside the state for longer than a month, then certain terms and conditions must be put in writing to that employee. And Bright Contracts definitely accommodates for that as well. And just different things that need to be included. So yes, you do have to, and you should. And Bright Contracts, yes, Bright Contracts does allow it.
We've just another one there. Basically, they're looking for the cost of the software. Yeah, I suppose that's something we should have spoken about maybe a little bit earlier. The cost of Bright Contracts, as you say, like it does up all your contracts of employment, and it look after your company handbook, and it sits inside, is €399. Now, we are happy to offer a discount to all of our webinar attendees, so there's no problem at all. Like, we're very happy to give a 25% discount to everyone that has joined in if they wish to purchase within the next 30 days, and we'll make sure that we send an email out to everybody letting you avail of that deal. But it's also be very mindful of, not only will you have the software, which will have everything and keep a full database and a great kind of a referral guide, you'll also have our full support. We give full HR support to all of our users, which means if you're kind of worried or you've any grievances, or you're going through anything at the moment, maybe managing long-term sickness or one of the employees, or you're going through a grievance or disciplinary or bullying harassment, you can contact us and we'll give you best practice and assistance throughout the process. We'll also be able to issue you with template letters and any type of documentation that you're also going to need. And then we're there on hand if something did ever escalate. that we can refer you on then to one of our main sort of legal experts as well, that they can kind of come in and in-house and assist you fully. So you do get a lot, and then obviously your updates. So rather than with, I know there might be different packages or providers you can go to, a lot of times might be twice a year that they'll update the information that you have. But the great thing, I suppose, about Bright Contracts, the fact that it is totally unique like to Ireland, is that we give it in real time. So the minute the update happens, the content has changed, it goes straight into the software. You just click a button, out goes all your old information, in with your new, and you're ready to go. Okay. Sorry, Laura, I know I'm just nervous of time.
Yeah, we're getting close to kind of cutting off time, but just to further to Michelle's answer there, is when you saw Michelle going into our support material online, that's just a whole kind of huge resource there of template documents, letters, guidance notes, and actually one of the key guidance notes that I think is in that section, and that it would get a lot of queries from employees, but it's support on actually rolling out your contracts of employment and your handbook, because that's where, obviously the software, is great and it will create your contract, but we do get a lot of queries from employers then, well, fantastic, I've got my contract, but how actually now do I go about rolling out that to employees, because I fear I'm going to get a little bit of resistance, particularly because so-and-so has been here for such a long time, or whatever the queries or fears that employers have. So we've got a huge kind of a resource there in terms of a video support and a kind of a step-by-step guide in terms of actually how to roll out that contract and handbook as well, because that can be a tricky part as well.
And absolutely, and on that note, just what Laura said, we also provide full assistance in setting everything up. So if, like, I know, look, we have a lot of questions that come in every time we do a webinar, and indeed on through the support lines, but we'll be able to kind of walk you through your contracts and your company handbook and answer any of the concerns that are individual to your own company, like if you ever use Bright Contracts. So it's just to make sure that that assistance is there for, especially for small employers, which again Bright Contracts was kind of developed for. It's just to make sure that you can have that peace of mind by knowing that there is somebody and there's kind of experts there that are on hand to assist you whenever you need it.
Perfect. Well, I think that's kind of all we have time for right now. There's a few questions that we probably didn't get to, but we will definitely be in contact with everybody, and any questions that we didn't answer we'll come back to you on. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. I hope you found it interesting and useful and informative. When you log out today, I think you'll be presented with a short questionnaire. I'd be really grateful, and we'd be really appreciative if you could complete that. It just gives us some feedback and helps us kind of develop further webinars as well, obviously all for your benefit as well. So again, thank you very much for tuning in. Hope you found it useful, and we'll hope to talk to you all soon.
Brilliant. Thank you. Take care.